Hello, welcome to Season 2, Episode 1 of Spectrum, where we'll be talking to you all about birth from a variety of different angles. I hope you enjoy the show and don't hesitate to write to us on our Facebook page with any comments or suggestions you may have.
Welcome to our section on the politics of birth. First of all, Joe will be discussing the impact of birth on having a career, Danielle will be offering her expertise on abortion laws, and I will be discussing the alternatives to birth.
Birth has become political. Who gives birth, when, with whom, who gets what rights? These issues are all of historic concern socially, but as our government becomes increasingly involved in these issues, they have also become political. Statutory maternity leave is 52 weeks, whereas paternity leave is only a fortnight, with the possibility of additional leave. Hardly any men get even half of the leave that women do. Biologically, women give birth to children. Socially, this means they have been expected to take on more responsibility to look after the child. Politically, this expectation has manifested itself in laws that assert women may have more time off work than men. We will be looking at whether we can assume this assumption is right. Women need time to recover after having a child. Do they need as long? Would they recover quicker were they to have their partner, be it a man or woman, at home to help in the first months after having a child? Is it sexist that so much responsibility is placed onto women? Is it sexist that men are not given the privilege of sharing the most exciting moments of their baby's life because they are at work?
From my degree, and in fact during the last year of my degree, I was working as a freelance journalist on feature journalism, and I managed to earn sufficiently, but not regularly. So then I was a freelance researcher, and I worked for an independent production company, which gave me the leg up to, or what I needed to go into HTV, where there's a salaried position, so not extremely well paid. But I had the opportunity to probably develop my career, but I decided the fact that I wanted to have a child. And it was a conscious decision because I didn't want to work while I was during the first 2 years of my child's life. Although I worked up pretty much to the last moment when I was pregnant. In that time, there was no 6 months maternity leave, so it wasn't a question. So by the time I decided to have a child, I was 30. So then, effectively, I made a conscious decision to not work. But in fact, I had to. But luckily, I was in Portugal and I was able to get freelance work and some teaching, which made childcare possible, if not easy. And then when my daughter was rising 5, I decided we had to come back to England. And there I found myself in a very difficult situation due to childcare, because I was working a full day. And while my husband wasn't working, it was possible because he would pick my daughter up from school. But as soon as he started to work, I had to pay for after-school care.
Was it a struggle to pay for the after-school care? Was it an expensive thing? Did you get any help from the government, or?
Well, no, absolutely none. And in fact, that was one of the things that I was observing when we're talking about it now, that I was probably paying more than many of the women that I knew were earning in the week to pay for childcare.
So you were paying more for childcare than many women earned in a week?
Yeah, because I had to have my daughter. I would finish work at 5 o'clock, and I used to pick up at 6, and sometimes if I was struggling at 7. So every night, and it was very expensive.
Did you feel that if you had wanted to stay at work even during the early years of having a child, do you think you would have been able to?
No, because I'm from a generation where it was more often the case that either the husband was working, so there was somebody at home to look after the child, or there was kind of job share. But I can't imagine it being possible to raise a child as I wanted to, which is to be with her and work at the same time.
You wouldn't have been able to work part-time, potentially?
No. Not in the job I was in. It just simply, there was never a question. It was always the hours that you had to work, and that was part of the job. And there was no question of flexible working at that time.
I believe you worked in the private sector and the public sector. Was there any difference in allowances made for people or employees with children in these sectors?
There probably would have been when I was in the public sector, but I didn't ask for it because, in essence, I knew that it would affect my career. You couldn't, if you were not available all the time, particularly, for example, at the Home Office, if you weren't available to do whatever you had to do, then it affected your career. And you had to choose between one or the other, or have expensive childcare.
And so you mentioned that your partner was actually the one that stayed at home during a certain period. Was that difficult for either you or him?
I think for both of us, because in terms of the male partner of that generation, there's a question of self-esteem, and clearly he didn't want to be at home. But it was anything that made him. He couldn't actually find work, so that was another issue. But without that, it would have been impossible for me to maintain the kind of hours that I had to work to continue my career.
Thank you. Maybe if we could ask the same question of Paul to get a man's perspective on this.
I was in university until I was 21, rising 22. And married more or less immediately after leaving university. From university, I was very lucky to get at the time, well-paying job. This is 1970. I think the first priority for my wife and I were to find a home and to have some level of stability in our lives. And so we both worked quite hard for perhaps 3 years after university, and then we were beginning to be comfortable, and we had some discussions about when it was appropriate to have children or not, because in that period having children was possible, in our view, only if my wife were to stop working for a fairly extended period, which then meant we had to support now 2 people and a home and a child from a single salary.
Sorry, I just wonder, was there ever any discussion about who should stay at home, or was it fairly automatic?
At the time, a simply economic decision. I could earn perhaps 3 or even 4 times the salary that my wife could earn. I suppose it was conventional as well, but I think it was also just a practical thing, yeah.
Did she receive any help from the government, or would she have been able to had she wanted to, do you know?
Well, I do believe that she had a maternity grant that helped the process of coming out of work, maybe from something like 6 weeks before the date of birth or the expected date of birth, and then until a little shortly afterwards.
Okay. Did you get any leave when your wife gave birth?
At the time, I don't think we had any official leave policy, although again, it's a lot of years ago, but to the best of my recollection, I had something like 2 days, the day of the birth and the day immediately following.
Do you feel like it would be useful for the partners of whoever's giving birth for them to have more time off?
It's so dependent on circumstance. In that environment, I think even with both of both of my children, my wife's parents acted as the support structure. They were there before the birth and for several weeks following the birth, and they gave the immediate support that was necessary to help and to do these kinds of things. I would have liked to have been able to do more, but in the structures of that moment, perhaps it would have been me or my wife's parents that would have been doing this kind of thing. And maybe at that time, I say the family thing was a support structure rather than the couple.
There's quite a bit of political noise at the moment about giving men more paternity leave. Do you think that is something that we should be doing? And do you think it's helpful?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Because, in fact, even when I was, pregnant, the onus was on the woman always. The man really wasn't included in the equation. Even if he wanted to be, it just wasn't possible. I think he used to get off, as I think as Paul said, the day of birth and the day after, and that was it. There was nothing. I think because employers can't actually support that all the time. If we ask the government to support that, we have to understand that there has been an increase in taxes or some accommodation for that payment too.
This in itself works off the values of a heteronormative society, and James will be illustrating that the world of political legislation around birth and adoption needs to broaden its mind to be more LGBTQ friendly. Depending on who is having a child, the impact is often perceived to be different. Having a child often seems to impact men and women's lives and careers differently. For women in particular, there often seems to be a pull between having a child and establishing a career. Is this the fault of the government in not providing more adequate support for women with children? Should more be done to tackle the extortionate cost of childcare? Should it simply be more widely available and more companies encouraged to provide daycare facilities for their staff? Birth is a political topic in more ways than one. There are gender issues around who is supported in giving birth, who gets leave, whose career is impacted, and who gets ignored from the discussion altogether. But there is more to it than that. There is also a class issue at play when it comes to who is encouraged to give birth and who is not. If you are a woman, have you ever felt torn between a high-flying career and having a child? For those who come from less privileged backgrounds, have you ever felt discouraged from starting a family? Bob Holman, a Scottish socialist and campaigner, spoke to several women in his book, Faith in the Poor, about their opportunities being undermined by class pressures. All these stories were written by the women themselves. Thank you to everyone for performing these stories, and for the men and women who were brave enough to come forward and share them.
I was born in Carnton, Glasgow. We moved to Castlemilk. I have a lot of memories about my dad. He was tough, but he was good with us. In his eyes, we always came first. For some reason, we had to move from Castlemilk. I'm not sure why. My dad did not want to move back to Carnton in case he got back into drinking again. So we had to move to Easterhouse, to Dalalea Drive. I was about 8 and I was quite scared at first, scared of a new school, and I felt I would not make pals. Dad took us to St Clair's school and I started to make pals. A couple of weeks after that my dad died. That hurt my mum and us children really bad. I did not really understand what happened for a while. We went back into care for a couple of weeks, and when I came back I brought some presents for my big brother, Mum and Dad. I asked Mum where Dad was, but she was in shock and could not tell me, and just said he was out. I went to the van and one of my sister pals said, "Your dad's dead." I just ran into the house and would not come out of my room. I'm used to living in Easterhouse, but the place had gone downhill. There are too many drugs about. I tried marijuana once. I got talked into it because a few of my pals were smoking. I was sick for ages. They used to laugh at me because I stopped, but not anymore. They respect that I don't want to take drugs. I get bored. I get up at about 11 o'clock and go downstairs and see my mum, have a cup of tea and make some breakfast. Then I go and see if any of my pals are out on the street. If not, I just sit and watch the telly. In the evening I might go out and play football. I used to go to the raves at the Tenants Hall, but there was a lot of fighting and I stopped going. I get depressed sometimes and think about my dad and what it would be like if he were here. In the future, I'd like to see my mum more happy and my brothers and sisters. I'd like to settle down and get a good job and a good place to live. I want to be able to make sure that my mum is well.
I was born in Glasgow, but I have little memory of my early days. I know that my dad was cruel to my mum, and I have no idea what happened to him. There were four children and myself. We were always in need of money, and I hated going to school because I did not have the things that other kids had. When I was about 8, my stepdad appeared. We moved to Garthamlock, Easterhouse. The council told Mum she had to take the house because it was the only one on offer, and she took it because all her life she had lived in bedsits, and it was her first proper house. Things were okay at first. We lived with our stepdad, and he was fine to live with at first, but then things started to happen. He would touch me in places I didn't like. I was scared of him, but I knew it was wrong. It didn't happen too often at first, but then it became a lot. If I was standing doing the washing up, he would come into the kitchen and put his hand between my legs. I would ask him to stop, but he would just go ahead and do it. I wanted to tell my mum, but I was scared it would kill her because she was very poorly at the time. She was waiting to go into hospital for an operation. She was 18 to 20 stone, and she was told she only had a 50-50 chance of surviving it. When she went into hospital, things got worse at home with my stepdad. He would make me get into his bed with him, and I would cry myself to sleep at night after saying a prayer to God to bring my mum home safe. Then the worst thing happened. Mum died and left me all alone in the world. I didn't know what was happening to my brother and sisters at the time. My aunt lived in Easterhouse, but I never saw much of her after my mum died. She was my mum's sister. I was now 11 or 12, and my body was growing and I was becoming a woman in my eyes. I didn't know what was going on, and I had no one to talk to. We lived across the road from the Little Sisters of Mercy, so I used to go to them just to talk, and we prayed a lot. I wanted to tell them what was going on at home, but I couldn't bring myself to talk about it. At the same time, I couldn't cope at school, so I started playing truant, or I'd be bad and get excluded. Then I started to run away from home, but my stepdad would come into town with his friend from the next close to us, and they would look for me, and when they found me, he would take me home and things would be the same again. The last time I ran away, I was in a shop, and I stole something and got caught. So when the police came, I told them a false name, and I had nowhere to live because both my mum and dad were dead. So they took me to an assessment centre called Beechwood, and I hated it. So the first chance I had, I ran away with another girl called Bet. We became good friends. For a long time, I kept running away from different homes. In the meantime, I tried to sniff glue. I tried all sorts of things, and I started to drink in pubs and clubs. I was only 13, but I passed for older because I was a big girl. I started to hang out with a lot of gay people and drink in gay bars. One day I walked into a gay bar, and my brother was sitting there. It was a shock for both of us. Then he asked me if I was gay, but I told him no, which was true. He told me he was, and I told him, so what? When I got out of the hospital, I got in touch with social services. They sent this woman to our room, and she was hopeless and offered no help at all. So when she went away, I got in touch with them again and asked for someone else to help me. They sent a lady called Lorraine, and she was a great help to all of us. She asked me what I wanted her to do, so we sat and talked for a bit. I explained how I came to be in Bradford, and she asked if I wanted her to take the kids into care till she helped me to get a house. I told her it would break my heart, but it was for the best. So I let her take the 3 big ones, and I kept the youngest one with me. It was so hard, but I knew the kids were well cared for, and I saw them a lot. But Ivor was still drinking. Then my brother moved to Bradford beside me, which was a bit of a help. I got an offer of a lovely 4-bedroomed house. When we went to see it, I was head over heels with it. I would have been daft to turn it down, so I accepted it. I am not rich, and I am not angry about it. I am the worst off in this street. Next door is some beautiful things. I don't hold a grudge against them. I'm glad they have got it. But I don't like it to be rubbed in like when other people's kids boast to my kids, we've got this, you haven't. It does make me jealous at times. I don't want to be stinking rich. I just want to be comfortable so that when my kids want a new pair of shoes, I can buy a pair. I had to go to a second-hand shop to get Gilbert a pair so he could go back to school. I've got central heating, but I can't afford to turn it on. I'm still in debt paying for last Christmas. I'm still paying for the kids' clothes. Sometimes you have to borrow to eat. Once I lent from a man and put down my child benefit book. I worked out that he took £450 to lend me £220 for Christmas. It was robbery, but I had no other option. I don't have much time for politics. I've got my kids to look after. But I do think everyone should be equal. I hope my children have a better future. I would not part with my kids or with my husband. But if I had my time again, I would not have so many kids. I don't like the poverty. I don't like the kids coming home and asking for something, and I can't give it to them.
Politics of birth start even before birth has taken place. Abortion is the most politically divisive issue of our generation. It is available to all in Great Britain through the NHS, but access to abortion is a more contentious issue outside the UK, particularly in first world countries where morality is still being debated and challenged.
What is the current situation in Europe?
Well, all but 3 European countries have made abortion legal and widely accessible to all. The first, Malta, is outright illegal, whilst Poland has quite restrictive laws allowing only the most strict medical cases. In Irish law, which we'll be focusing on, it is only allowed when there's extreme circumstance, such as the mother is suicidal or her life is at risk.
How is it that Irish and British laws have become so different?
Well, I think it's quite surprising considering how close we are, though 2 countries are very polar on this one particular topic. Originally, both actually shared the same law, the 1861 Offences Against the Person Act, which made abortion entirely illegal. And then the Republic of Ireland at the start of the 20th century gained its independence. A few decades later, the UK passed its current laws allowing for abortion until 24 weeks gestation. Ireland did not legislate until, in the last few years, a ruling by the European Court of Human Rights led to a ruling that where a mother's life is at risk, abortion must be made freely available. So the Protection of Life During Pregnancy Act was passed in 2013. Any instance where the mother is deemed suicidal by 3 medical professionals, she is legally entitled to an abortion.
And how many cases have taken place under this new Irish law?
Well, so far, we only know of 1 case. The first and only abortion carried out in Ireland happened this summer when a teenage immigrant was told she was 8 weeks pregnant at her health screening when gaining access to the country. She had been a victim of civil war and was raped in her home country, and records show she immediately asked for an abortion, but it took several months for her to gain the legal counsel and a court date, by which time she had reached 24 weeks gestation. 2 psychologists deemed her suicidal, but a 3rd expert, an obstetrician, said the baby was old enough to survive outside of the womb. In reaction to this, she went on hunger strike, and a court injunction force-fed the mother for a week until she eventually agreed to a caesarean, which was carried out at 25 weeks. The child is confirmed as alive and is still in hospital care. Details of the trauma impacted on a child born so critically premature have yet to be released, but it is confirmed the mother has renounced all parental claim, and the baby will remain in state care.
What issues do you think that this has brought forward?
Well, obviously there's a concern for the particular human rights of the mother. In Irish law, the 8th Constitutional Amendment decrees that the state acknowledges the right to life of the unborn and with due regard to the equal right to life of the mother, guarantees in its laws to respect and as far as practicable by its laws to defend and vindicate that right. But we encounter an issue of translation as Irish laws have both an English language and Irish language version, and both have legal standing. It can obviously be very difficult to make these worded precisely the same, but as far as practicable from the English language version is not the same as the Irish, which is Raheen fós an cartin a cosint is a híbhlinn glíthe sa bhéid gur féidir é, which translates correctly as guarantees the right of the mother to be protected as far as possible. Outside of this, we also have the issue of children born into the world by this law, which will lead to them being in state care, and the full extent of their health challenges of premature babies being responsible solely to the state.
Do you think that this law has made any impact on Irish women?
Well, unfortunately, it seems to have been unaffected towards Irish women in general. I mean, after all, thousands of Irish women travel abroad for abortions every year and have done so, even before 1992, when it was actually made legal. So we know that between 1980 and 2013, over 150,000 women are registered with Irish addresses at English and Welsh private clinics. In the last year alone, that was 3,500 women. What we've kind of seen is that women who are financially able to travel outside the country will continue to do so, whilst those who lack the financial means or right to travel are confined by these laws and desperate enough to seek abortion within the system. Government ministers have come out and spoken publicly in favour of reviewing not only the 8th Amendment for referendum, but also whether rape should be grounds for abortion in its own right.
And do you think that change is on the way?
Well, obviously with mounting global pressure, the issue of basic human rights cannot remain ignored. Steps in the past year do show a movement towards indoctrinating more equality for all and a protection of women's sovereignty over their own bodies. As we can see with the changing views of society, this issue is one of several concerns about bringing children into the world and the politics of parental claim, and hopefully we will see further actions taken in this case.
In a heteronormative society, the only means of having children is often perceived as being through a man and a woman. However, what options are there for same-sex couples? In order to gain a broader understanding of public opinion on the matter, we went to our university library to find out people's thoughts. We asked about the alternatives to biological birth, as well as the options open to those in same-sex partnerships.
So we're talking about LGBT people able to adopt children.
Yeah, no, I think that's legit. I think that should be a thing.
Yeah? Do you think they might come up against any problems? Do you think there might be prejudice against them in any way?
Yeah, obviously there will be.
Options for someone who can't have a child, I'd say adoption,
surrogacy,
IVF,
fostering. What's the one where say I was the one unable to have a child, but then uses someone else's eggs, using that one? Yeah, egg donation. Yeah. That one.
And this is just anyone who wants a child.
Yeah, regardless of sexuality or the couple's gender.
Yeah, I think as long as you kind of love the child, then.
And from that, I take it you're both okay with same-sex adoption then?
Yeah, entirely. Yeah.
Here in the UK, there's the option of adoption. This was only legalised relatively recently. In Scotland, it happened in 2007, meaning same-sex adoption has only had 7 years to be accepted by wider society. According to a Scottish Government publication, in 2011 there were only about 16,000 children being looked after by the state, mainly by foster parents. According to this paper, about 5,000 ceased to be cared for, but this doesn't necessarily mean that these children were adopted. It may mean that they were able to return to their family homes, or grew too old to be looked after by the state. Only about 1,500 children were in care homes at this time. In other words, in proportion to the number of people likely to be looking to adopt, there are few children to actually satisfy this demand, making adoption a difficult option for anyone in Scotland regardless of sexual orientation. In interviewing students, we came across 2 gay individuals who considered the parenting options open to them.
I've actually had to face this problem already. Being a gay man, I, at a young age had to sort of come to the conclusion that I would never biologically have the ability to have kids with my partner. So obviously the main thing that's come for me is adoption. I mean, there's the option of surrogacy, but for me personally, I feel that's a lot of money to spend when there's hundreds and thousands of kids out there that just need a loving family, and I think I could provide that for them. I think adoption is the best thing. I think it's an opportunity for one loving person, 2 loving people together to take a child that is in need of care and love in that family sort of setting, which can be provided by anybody, and to give them that and to prove there's someone out there that loves you and is looking for you. I think the biggest problem around adoption and people's attitudes to adoption is the fact that there's so many older kids in family groups that are getting split up from their siblings and not being provided a space because people don't want to take on 3 kids at once. But for me that's the main issue around adoption, is people's attitudes to the children themselves.
Do you think there's any discrimination against LGBT couples when they're looking to adopt?
I mean, it depends. The adoption system varies around the world and in every place. I mean, I think it's ridiculous that there are religious groups that help and decide on placing families with children. I mean, in a secular society, that shouldn't matter. You shouldn't have this sort of... It shouldn't be an option for churches to be able to take in kids, indoctrinate them and then decide how they're going to spend the rest of their lives. They, have the right to choose for themselves. And even if they are young, they don't have the ability to choose for themselves, it's their parents, the people that are going to look after them for the rest of their lives, that should help them make that decision.
I am a lesbian and I've been with my partner a long time, and we're not seriously considering it, but it has come up in discussion. Obviously, as 2 women, we cannot conceive. So we have looked into IVF or donor or something like that. But obviously adoption is a big option. The only struggle is when you're a lesbian couple, you have to consider the thoughts of the birth parents. And a lot of people don't want their child being raised by a same-sex couple. It's not always going to be the nicest experience for the child. You know what kids are like. If they can say something mean about a kid, they will. So I think you have to be very considerate and very sensitive about that. So that is something we've considered: adoption, and then IVF or donor. I think that so far those are our 2 main options. I think they are traditionally the most obvious and the easiest. the easiest two routes to go down. And I think in this day and age, one or both of the two would be available to a same-sex couple, especially in Scotland.
And what issues do you think face gay couples regarding parenting in general?
I think it's tough. I think it's really tough. Kids are mean, and I think you wouldn't, like, my coming out experience wasn't, well, for my family it was amazing, but for my friends at school it wasn't fantastic, and you'd never wish that on a child, especially when it's not even them that's coming out, it's their parents. I think it's really difficult, but at the same time I think if you've been through that and you've had that struggle and you've maybe faced some issues that other people haven't faced, that gives you a whole new spectrum when it comes to parenting. So you've got to take the good with the bad. And I think if you can provide a loving home to a child, then what's wrong with that? There is a lot of progress being made, and I think judging by the state of play, especially in the UK just now, progress will continue to be made, and that makes me very happy.
That's brilliant, thanks very much for your time. Adoption is of course by no means an option open only to LGBT people, or a somehow inferior alternative to producing a biological child of your own. Others might want to consider adoption for reasons such as infertility, concerns that overpopulation of the world is putting a strain on resources, or perhaps a relative or friend has died, leaving their child without a suitable guardian. It's more complicated if you want to become a biological parent if you're in a same-sex relationship. If you're a gay man, you have the option, if you're fertile, of finding a surrogate mother who will be artificially inseminated with your sperm and then give birth to your child. This has complex legal and emotional implications. If you have a partner and intend to bring up your child with them, who counts legally as the second parent, the birth mother or your partner? What if the mother feels a strong emotional bond with the child and doesn't want to give it up, or later wants access to the child? It's a complicated decision for both parties to take. Some feel strongly that this represents a commodification of the female body, especially when a surrogate mother is paid to carry out this act. However, that is by no means to say that this is always the case. This is an arrangement that can and does work in some cases. For same-sex female couples, the same issue applies in reverse, but with finding a male sperm donor. Is this apparent commodification of part of the human body problematic? And what happens if there are second thoughts? One might say that donating one womb temporarily for this purpose, or for that matter one's sperm, is not so different from giving blood. A person willingly chooses to carry out such an act for the good of another. Yet pregnancy is much more demanding in terms of time and physical strain on the body than donating sperm or blood. Also, what if you live in a country where healthcare isn't free? Which party pays for the healthcare costs associated with the pregnancy and birth of the child? Another practice carried out by same-sex male partners choosing to have a biological child together is to use their sperm and mix it together before insemination, choosing not to find out which sperm fertilised the egg in the womb. This way, neither of the two feels more or less the father of the child than the other. However, what position does this leave the child in? What if, in years to come, they want to find out who their parents really are? What if the couple were to split? Who gets custody of the child? Arguments as to who the real biological father may then emerge, regardless of the fact that the two partners may both have equal status as parents on the birth certificate. As a gay man myself, I would say personally that the alternatives to heterosexual birth and family patterns are by no means any better or worse. They each require just as much thought and attention as each other, but for different reasons. Ultimately, birth is not just about giving pleasure to people or fulfilling their desire to bring a child into the world. What is most important of all is the child and their upbringing. It's a responsibility before it's a right, in my opinion, and that goes for everyone, regardless of gender, sexual orientation, or circumstances. Family structures are moving away from the traditional nuclear family, and this is allowing people more options, but careful considerations always need to be made when deciding about birth and bringing up a child.